So first of all, I just wanted to say that this is a very familiar position for me. Previous to my career, I guess, with hemp genetics and then Verve Seed Solutions, I was managing a very similar applied research station in Roblin, Manitoba, called the Parkland Crop Diversification Foundation, and that's where I began my journey with hemp. At that time, of course, looking for diversified crops to grow in our region, which is very similar to sort of the Battle River region, I guess. We're also challenged by frost-free days. We've got a few stones. The soils are very much the same in climate. So yeah, I guess I come from the same type of background, and in 2015 is when I took the leap and started with the company HGI, Hemp Genetics International, which has just recently merged with another company called Tritium T3H to form Verve Seed Solutions, and my contact information is below. There'll be very little sales pitch here, a slight bit, but mostly I just want to cover the agronomy aspect and try to answer as many questions as possible for either those that are seasoned veterans growing hemp, or if you're new to hemp, and what the opportunities might be. A little more background. I am from Manitoba myself. The company research branch is based out of Saskatoon. We have offices also in Alberta. We're connected with I guess with Tritium is T3H is our secondary partner on Verve, which is also associated with High Tech Production. So Mr. Jamie Hunter, who is our COO, is based out of Caroline, Alberta. So we do have some representation in Alberta. So I farm here in Manitoba with my brother-in-law, and I say that tongue-in-cheek, sort of. This is my full-time job, but we farm together, growing pedigreed seed for not only the hemp industry, but other crops as well, wheat and peas, faba beans, etc. So a lot of what I'm going to present today is based upon some of the research that was done early on when hemp was introduced into Canada way back in 1998, and then of course from my practical experience as a seed production farmer here on the prairies. So without further ado, I'll kind of get going here. So that's of course me on the left, and I'm kind of focusing generally on grain and fiber. That's in my opinion what is driving the industry primarily in Canada. There is a cannabinoid, or fractions is another term that's often used, where we're growing hemp for CBD production. But unless there's specific questions to that, which I can get into at the end, but for the most part, what I'd like to go through is establishment and what's required and what to expect when growing a hemp crop. So first and foremost, make sure you know what the market is demanding. And like every other crop, we've got ebbs and flows in the hemp market. Currently, we are in a position where marketing efforts are strong, I guess. There's an overall, I wouldn't say an overall global shortage of hemp grain, or I like to call a seed. Seed is what we put in the ground to grow hemp, and grain is what we produce. So the global demand for grain is in a good place right now. We have overproduced in the past, and that's some of the trials and tribulations, I guess, of a smaller marketplace. You're at the mercy of other countries, I guess, and some of the regulations, and that's without getting into too much detail, that has put a challenge. But right now, with the grain production movement is good. We're seeing a very strong interest, and more than even an interest in processing fiber, and particularly in Alberta. So we can't miss that opportunity also. And then we'll try to touch base a little bit about the pros and cons of having a dual purpose crop, whether you want to grow straight for grain, straight for fiber, or grain and fiber, and what the opportunities might be. So want to focus on how you can supply quality hemp. Again, that's primarily on establishment and harvest that we'll cover. And through the growing season, you do need that systematic approach. to maximize quality. And of course, that takes into our proper planning, which again is starts with an opportunity like this to share information with each other on experiences, taking into agronomics, and of course, once again, the harvest and storage practices, which is quite important for this crop. So I've kind of mentioned, I've touched on a few of the aspects within the industry. Canada is seen as a leader, world leader in grain production and grain processing. With this crop, it has so many opportunities that, this is from of course, the Friends series where they were pulling a couch up and the word pivot. And that's exactly what it seems that we've had to do to a certain degree in the hemp industry. Pivoting from grain now into fiber production, perhaps, or dual purpose I mentioned. And of course, when CBD was in 2017 was legalized, there was some pivoting there. So it's just a crop that has so many multifaceted revenue streams and uses that it makes it prone to, in some ways, the opportunities, but at the same time, that could be a challenge. You want to make sure that whatever your market is that you're going after, you try to do all you can to provide the highest quality product for that one industry. So on the agronomy side, get right into it. So all of these things are no different for any other crop that we'll kind of cover off here. So field selection, rotation, which kind of goes in hand with field selection, variety selection. How do you pick a variety? I think there's like 75 different varieties on the list of approved cultivars now. What do you use for making that selection? What do you need to know about seeding, fertility, weed control, and then finally, of course, harvest that we'll try to cover off here. With soil properties, you want to try to find a field that has a moderate soil texture. A loam, clay loam soil is best suited. Again, hemp is a crop that just does not like its feet wet. That is the main issue. It just doesn't stand standing moisture hardly at all. So that's the reason that heavy clays should be avoided. Heavy clays also, I guess, just backing up a bit, hemp is a type of crop that will show you almost every imperfection in your field if you have any. So, and if you don't think you have, then it's a great crop to plant so you can see where your problem issues are. It's not real great in saline areas. It does not like compaction. It has a very strong taproot, but it has its limitations, I guess, of breaking through a lot of that hard pan. Sandy soils, again, it is a crop that does well with adequate moisture too, like every other crop. And similar to, I would say, soybeans, those July, August rains seem to be very beneficial for this crop as it's setting seed and basically really utilizes that moisture as it moves its energy from producing biomass into seed production. It takes advantage of those midsummer rains. This is kind of just some example of what hemp will look like if there is excess water. You can see in the picture to the right, this is just a breeder plot from a few years back, of course, but you get the yellowing, definitely some stunting and eventually death if the crop doesn't get any oxygen into those roots in due time. So with that, you can come into, you can get into some bigger issues. Again, hemp takes a few weeks to really get going. It gets established very quickly. In about 3 to 4 days, when planted sort of at the right depth and into good conditions, it'll pop out of the ground definitely within 4 days. But again, if we get a substantial rain or any ponding, and it seems like every rain event that we do get now seems to be a major event. This was a case here where we had about a 3 or 4 inch rain just on the other side of the border into Saskatchewan, with the field did not have real great internal drainage. The field, you could see where the ponding was, And what happens in those areas, of course, is you have, whether it's weeds coming in or weeds in the form of the previous year's crop. In this case, probably canola or wheat taking in there. So all of that has to get cleaned out, and it kind of puts you behind the 8 ball right off the bat. And not to say that you can't deal with it, but just try to pick a field, I guess, that has some good drainage, and hope that Mother Nature works with you for the year. When we look at fertility, this is a fertility uptake study that we did a number of years ago. I think it was about 2001 actually in hemp when it was first introduced. And at this point in time, we were looking at a crop that, the varieties at that time were 15, 16 feet tall. In this case, this field here probably had a crop height of about 12 feet. We replicated this study once again, once we started to have some of the shorter varieties, and didn't see much of a sway in one way or the other as far as the total plant uptake on these nutrients. So this is still kind of the guideline that we use for fertility management. So we can take a look here for nitrogen. Comparing with canola, hemp will uptake up to 200 pounds or 200 kilo per hectare, which is basically the same as pounds per acre, give or take 10 or 15%. Compared to canola that has an uptake of about 120. So for a nitrogen recommendation, we would suggest that you probably fertilize close to your canola requirements, but perhaps you can increase that nitrogen either as much as you can afford, and or up by maybe 15 or 20%. The interesting part here is that when the grain is harvested and taken off the field, about 40 pounds of that nitrogen is in the seed and taken off the field. So that's your sort of replacement nitrogen, as long as you have a retting procedure, or obviously the rest of that nitrogen is tied up in the stalk or leaf material that, as we combine, that can be leached back into the soil with as soon as you get the first rain after harvest. That starts going back into your soil as nitrogen being a mobile nutrient. In comparison, canola has about 65 kg per hectare leaving the field when it's taken to your whomever, Bunge or whomever. On the phosphate level, looking up very similar, about that 50 pounds that we would suggest that is available for the crop. And again, the grain, you're taking about 19 pounds off, or 19 kilos. Potassium is an interesting one too. So when we're talking about a fiber crop, without a retting process, or if you're cutting, we want to make sure that if possible, we can have that crop ret in the field again. So once it's cut, the uptake is about 211 kilos per hectare. Where if you take the entire plant off the field in a green state, you're removing fairly large amounts of potassium, but in the grain itself, really just 10 pounds. So most of the soils in Canada here are higher in potassium, but it is something to be taking note of, that potassium again is known as moving those nutrients up and down the stem or the stalk, and straw strength, or in this case stem strength, I guess. But yeah, and being such a tall plant with a very strong stem, it's no wonder or no surprise, I guess, that potassium is quite an important nutrient also. And then even there is some uptake of sulfur, so it's not a bad idea. Again, similar to your canola program, that if you threw in some sulfur would be good. We want to make sure hemp is very sensitive to any seed place fertilizer. I do like to have that phosphate to a certain degree, up to probably 25 pounds of P2O5 with the seed is tolerable. On good soil conditions, with a little bit of a 1 or 2 inch spread at least. There's a slight bit of mortality in that, but the uptake, of course, is the increased yield on that first bit of nitrogen. And as I mentioned, hemp's a bit of a baby to get out of the ground and establish, so that early phosphate is very crucial for the increased vigor that it provides the crop or the plant or the seed at those early times. So a little bit of seed place phosphate is great. Keep all the rest of your nutrients off to the side, either banded mid-row or what have you, but make sure that we don't have a lot of an issue with the salt index with hemp, because it just doesn't tolerate very well. And speaking of nitrogen, I kind of just threw this in. We're going to sort of get into a bit on crop rotation. And as I mentioned, the aspect of actually affording nitrogen, we can see where prices of nitrogen were in 2016, 17, 22, they're kind of come down a wee bit, but, certainly we've seen, a strong increase in the price for nitrogen. And and when we're talking about a crop that is a nitrogen loving crop, then it would be amiss not to mention this. So I just see the question here, so I'll kind of come back a little bit. So the question was about fertilization for fiber, and it's a very good question, and thank you very much for that question, because initially we thought, the crop needed that nitrogen source, to grow that biomass, but it seems that we are in a better position, I guess, knowing and talking to the likes of, say, Canada Rockies up in your area and other fiber processors. There doesn't seem to be as strong a demand for that nitrogen as there is for grain production. We're still able to get a very uniform crop that grows well, has biomass, as long as we're looking at about 30 to 40 to 50 pounds of available N for the crop there. So that is a significant difference, and thank you so much for that question, because that's a very important fact for that. So when we look at what we can have as far as rotational crops, this is this is now a field of mine that was at one point in time separated into 3 distinct fields that had 3 different crop types in it in the year 2020. So as you can see, faba bean was seeded in 2020 in the area where it's showing mostly green. We had wheat to the east of that field, and you can see some red, or the red basically signifies a lack thereof nitrogen, and then canola to the north. Now, the north field in particular, has a much different soil type in there. We get into the north part of that, it's lower, and so there's other issues. But I think overall, this is a NDVI satellite photo taken again, and the amounts of nitrogen that were left over for residuals. So any crop, any legume crop that you can have in front of hemp is a huge benefit. So this was in 2020. In 2021, we all know, in our area, I should say, we were in more of a drought situation. So we didn't really see, I would say that was the limiting factor. It wasn't the nutrients that was the limiting factor for yield. It was really the moisture. And in 2021, I had the field on my home quarter. 2022, we had good moisture, adequate moisture throughout the growing season, had those late season rains too. And it was the second best hemp crop that I have grown on faba bean, which was on faba bean stubble. And the only other field that or crop that we did better on was actually on hog manure. So as I said, it responds very well on the grain side yield, but on the fiber side, it will still provide you with that biomass, where it really shows the benefit is having it in that grain production side. So variety selection, again, this is where Battle River Research comes into play. There are some other trials, the Canadian Hemp Trade Alliance, of which I'm a director and chair of the National Variety Trials. We just went through, we'll have the final version of the 2022 data available coming up here. So Canadian Hemp Trade Alliance, if you Google it, will have those variety trials. They've been running for 5 years now. There'll be a final version coming out too. So, and again, try to get localized data. So again, as I mentioned, Battle River, if they can perform some of that localized data, it's as we all know, there's nothing like seeing it in your backyard. Seed Manitoba, Seed Saskatchewan, Seed Alberta have now all attributed to having hemp included in their seed guides. So all of that is valuable information. Just looking across this is a variety trial, of course, and you can kind of see the differences within even the plant structure or stature. We've got a short variety here on the left, likely Finola, some monoecious varieties that you cannot really see the difference between the white sticks are the males sticking out. So some monoecious varieties in there, dioecious varieties. So there is quite a difference, and you kind of want to try to match a variety that's suited not only to your climate, your latitude, but also for what the companies are looking for. More site years, the better, of course. And, we get a lot of information from Coffee Talk, and there's nothing wrong with that. I'm a science-based person too. I like to have those coefficient of variations and your least significant differences to help make the decision over a long period. And this will be a crop that you will see certain varieties perform significantly better than others in certain climatic conditions. And so again, that's where the length of time, the more site years is really an advantage in making a decision to help mitigate your risk. This is the short really plug for Verve Seeds. We have our hemp seed catalog. I'm not going to go through our varieties, but please reach out. We provide both grain, fiber, CBD varieties, and the agronomy support to go with it. And yeah, we're closely related or closely in conjunction with a number of the different processors for both grain and fiber. And can get you in contact if need be. But yeah, that's as far as my seed sales goes, that's her. So on to variety selection again. So what are some of the things that you want? Yield is king, whether it's biomass, grain, or CBD production. The yield is the best indicator. Height, if you are just going for grain, you want to sort of have increase your harvest index. And so basically that means that, the amount of volume that you put through your combine depicts, versus yield is quite important. So just thinking back to the early years when I was talking about those 12, 13, 14, and 17-foot crops, when they first came into Canada, most of the combine operators, kind of were sitting in their seat fairly puckered up, just hoping that their combine wouldn't catch fire or plug. With the new varieties now, the shorter stature, that's kind of a thing of the past. It's not to say you won't have some wrapping issues, but it's what it's done is it's helped increase the provincial average yields. We were down to 300 to 400 pounds per acre when we first started those variety assessment. Probably now into that 800 to 1,000 pounds of grain is in the realm, and so it's it's one that you should take a look at quite well. Not just the yield, but also what type of harvest, what type of combine are you driving, what color is it? All of that makes a little bit of a difference on what you might have to prepare for. Disease susceptibility, there are some differences with varieties. Try to find out, and on the disease side, really it's sclerotinia and white mold or gray mold that are the biggest issues. And hemp is a host, as is canola and other crops, so it's always around. But thus far in Canada, we haven't seen, a complete wreck due to disease susceptibility. You will see, perhaps an increase in either severity or incidence, but really nothing kind of over that 5 to 10%, definitely not 10%, but 5% range. So it's, it's there, so you should be aware of it. Herbicide tolerance is one that's coming on a little bit more. There's certain varieties that will handle herbicides better. So be careful, make sure you know what the variety is and what that tolerance level might be. There's still ways to get around that by reducing, and in particular, bromoxynil, which has just been put on the minor use label. It can create leaf burn. Some varieties, again, tolerate it better. Some you want to spray and then, get that fishing boat behind your truck and take off for a week or so and then come back, because you'll probably panic. But hemp, once it gets its roots underneath it and gets to be in that 6-inch, 7-inch tall, it really starts to perform like the crop that we know, or the crop type that we know, that it's a very aggressive grower. So it tends to grow out of that. But there has been incidents where it has affected yield detrimentally. So making sure if you're going to go with it, go with a proper rate. Maturity, it's a photoperiod sensitive crop for the most part. There are either autoflower traits in some varieties that assist that, but a lot of that, what that means essentially is that the crop will start to get into its reproductive state once it realizes that the days are starting to get shorter. So after the summer solstice is essentially when that happens. And so what that does is it really kind of puts you at, if you're seeding, doesn't matter if you're seeding the beginning of May or the end of May, you're probably going to harvest sort of middle of September regardless. If it is not a photoperiod, if it's an autoflower type, you're going to seed the beginning of May, you will have an earlier harvest. And if you're seeding at the end of May, you'll have a little bit later harvest. But I would say predominantly they're photoperiod sensitive, and they will react to the day length, which again, in your area, a little bit further north, we do get some increased biomass, which is great for the fiber aspect. It's longer for growing season for the grain too. And by the growing season, I mean just those days are longer, with those 14 to 16-hour days. Shelling can be an issue that we'll show you some pictures of when hemp gets close to being harvested. But on the grain side of things, the bract material that is holding the seed or protecting the seed through the growing season starts to open up as it matures. The seed is exposed. So one of the first things you'll notice when we're talking about harvest timing is that you'll see a lot of birds, particularly those mourning doves, start to congregate in the field, or blackbirds. When they first start, you can, it's your indicator to start keeping an eye on things, because the color of the field is not going to change very much. It remains quite green, but you have to take a look closely at the seed head, and the seed is going to mature from the stalk or stem outward. And when 75% of those seeds are outside of, or that bract material is opening, that's a good indicator that you're getting in that range for harvest and that moisture, which we'll talk about a little bit later. Again, wind can cause havoc there too. If we happen to get into particularly southern Alberta area with strong winds, in those areas, swathing is often used. Manitoba, I would say we're probably 99 or 95% is straight cut. Saskatchewan's probably half and half either way, but there are different options and varieties that can help get you through that process, or that risk, I guess I should say. Cannabinoid content, I mean, it was partly important for variety selection, really not now. All of the varieties that are on the list of approved cultivars, as a farmer, you do not have to have that field tested for THC. All that testing is done at the pedigreed seed level. And so that takes the onus off of you as a producer. You don't have to have that. With feminized seed available in Canada now, again, most processors for CBD want that feminized seed at higher concentrations of CBD. And the whole market with regards to sort of that 2 to 4% CBD in the chaff is not a very strong market at this point in time. So biomass and percent usable fiber, and as the fiber industry matures more, we're going to hear more about this. So biomass is one thing, and by biomass I mean tons per acre, but out of that there's going to be a certain percentage that is usable fiber, and and that'll be important in variety selection. So as a seed company, that's something that we're testing our varieties for moving forward to make sure that we meet the needs of the processors in that matter. There's usable fiber, and then of course there's the long bast fiber, which is on the outside of the stalk. The inside, it consists of short fibers called hurd, which is also very, I guess you could say, popular right now as far as on the marketing side of things. Hurd is driving a large part of that fiber market and used for things like hempcrete, etc. But yeah, the full plant utilization is definitely on the upswing for sure. So again, take a look at the Health Canada list of approved cultivars, and that'll tell you sort of what, make sure that there's a variety on there. There's really, I would say, yeah, anyway, I won't get into the black market, but certified seed has to be used. And again, the reason primarily being Health Canada knows the THC levels throughout that crop's kind of parentage and life cycle over the next 4 or 5 years. So that's the whole reason that certified seed has to be purchased every year. The tags have to be sent in or recorded for Health Canada. So there's no basically farmer saved seed that's legal at this point. So into seeding, what we want to do is, first of all, is try to seed when soils are relatively warm. This is kind of a contradictory thing, and I mean, in the past, and what we've seen early on is that hemp again will be one of the first to volunteer in the spring. From the year before, you'll see volunteers kind of just sneaking in around the snow. So it's not like it's not going to germinate with cold temperatures, but there will be an increased mortality for sure. And there's such a variance in there that it's probably not worth it unless you want to increase your seeding rate kind of substantially. And so one of the most important, or one of the most telltale research projects that we did do was a seeding date study. Again, we went so far as to dormant seed hemp in October and had remarkable results for 1 year out of 3, where the winter was, kind of a similar to winter what we have in Manitoba now. Good snowfall, very cold throughout the winter. A fairly quick melt in the spring without a lot of freezing and thawing. And I mean, we were able to have really impressive fiber yields with that. And then every year that we tried it after that was a complete failure. Hemp was, whether it got a little bit of moisture, a little bit of warmth there, and it took that moisture in and then just completely destroyed the seed. So again, the primary recommendation is to seed into warmer soils, 10 degrees Celsius above on the average, and seeding shallow, hopefully into moisture. You could probably go down inch, and I would say no more than an inch and a half on sort of a soil that is very forgiving with lots of organic matter. But like I said, it's a bit of a baby to establish, and any of these extra stresses that we put on seem to have a detrimental effect and just really kind of increases that seed mortality. So the range for grain is we're in that 20 to 30 pounds per acre. I don't know if we've kind of hit the proper or a proper strong recommendation on the fiber. It really depends upon the company that you're working with. If a company is looking at predominantly perhaps even the herd market and the long bast fiber is a subset or the secondary market, then you might be able to, or might want to be going with a lower seeding rate. But this is, again, these are in general terms. We always recommend doing, I know Alberta Ag has always had a very good seeding plant density indicator or formula, I should say. So I could say for grain, you probably want to look at anywhere between 10 to 12 plants per square foot, taking into consideration your germination, your 1,000 kernel weight, your mortality is your own guess, but using 15 to 20% is usually a safe method. And then looking for higher seeding rates for fiber because they want a consistently skinny stalk, basically the size of your finger or a pencil. And by having that higher seeding density, that's how you can achieve that. That's a little bit more uniformity. So again, these are recommendations. Always check with the processor and who you're selling to on what they would suggest also, and then take into consideration the varieties that you're growing. So in comparison, as I just put in here, is for CBD fields, we're looking at 2,500 to 3,000 seeds per acre, nothing to do with pounds. There's about 26,000 seeds in a pound of hemp, generally 26 to 28,000. So, it gives you an indication that it's a very, very low seeding rate. So yeah, basically any seeding implement that's out there now, I think can be used from planters. This is our air seeder. We use anhydrous ammonia, again, that's mid-row banded, and we'll put a lot of our other nutrients in that mid-row and just a little bit with the seed. But one thing to note, if you are using air seeders, is to just be cognizant of that air volume. Hemp, again, has a very sensitive seed coat, which likely has at least a certain degree of the reasoning why that mortality is higher. So it doesn't seem to be a problem in this first primary manifold, but when you get into these secondary manifolds, start your headland, maybe go 100, 200 yards, and then check that manifold. If there's anything that looks like coffee starting to develop there, you're crushing the seed. So you're going to have to turn that wind speed down. So that's just the note there, and as an average, we probably run our fan RPM on this unit at about 26 to 2,700 RPM for seeding wheat with some fertilizer. We'll drop that down to maybe 2,500 for canola, and then with hemp, we're right around that 2,000. Again, those are just guidelines or kind of indications of what we've done. Make sure you check those manifolds often for any sort of cracking, because it will cause problems for sure. We're not going to spend a lot of, but this is basically what CBD production kind of looks like. So much different seeding method. We're looking at what we call an orchard style. So this is a completely different, really, presentation and farming method. But we could certainly help you with that if there's any interest, for sure. Again, the disease, this is just some sclerotia bodies that were found in the stem of hemp, and you can see this is the issue. And just looking at the picture on the left, you see this obviously severely infected stalk that's cracked over, but there's not a lot of stalks around it that have that same issue. Again, there's a certain amount, but economically, or as far as an economic threshold, it's probably not a matter of, there'll be due time when we need to actually have a fungicide, I think, as acres increase and that severity may increase. The problem here is that on the processor side, you get if it happens to get through the combine into the grain sample, and it's maybe cleaned, but it's broken in half and not taken out completely, as you can imagine, if you had half that looks very much like a mouse turd or some other excrement, and just really causes issues on the processor. So that's the main issue with the Sclerotinia sclerotia bodies for now. Not to say that we couldn't see some more severe problems in the future, but we're trying to keep an eye on that as best we can. This is what it looks like, almost like take all in the field, where your eye is going to go to it and you think there's a big issue. Most of that seed kind of doesn't fill properly and blows out the back of the combine. So again, that's not an issue, but it is there, and that's what it kind of looks like. You'll see it in the field. When it comes to insects, there's again, I talk about economic thresholds. There's nothing registered for an insecticide in hemp, but I mean, you got to do what you got to do. Cutworms is probably the major issue. I don't have a picture here of a cutworm. This is a European corn borer to the right, which as we get more increased acres of corn, that can become more of a problem, and they'll burrow right into the stalk, and then it'll sort of look almost like that, the sclerotinia issue, where the head, it just starts to, the nutrients get cut off from the head. Grasshoppers can be an issue if there's an abundance or an overpopulation. Generally speaking, they kind of just like to munch on the foliage, and there's so much biomass again and so much leaf matter that it does take quite a number of them to cause a real yield hit. And the same as Bertha on the left here, and that's a picture for those that aren't familiar. That's a picture of a male plant. Those are the male pollen sacs. A lot of people, when they first start growing hemp, will think that's the seed starting to form, but that is actually just pollen sacs that are formed ahead of the females in the production method. Weed control. This is a picture of an organic field that's challenged by weeds, and one of my biggest pet peeves is that if there's some articles or literature that not so much anymore, but in the past, it's talking about how weed is slip of the tongue there, how hemp is such a weed killer, where it really isn't. If given the opportunity, a slight advantage, hemp is an excellent weed suppressor. But you have to give it a chance. In this case here, I mean, the weeds are equal, if not further advanced than hemp, and this is just going to be trouble all along. It's robbing nutrients, moisture, everything. Don't expect to be seeding hemp into a field that you expect you're going to clean it up. On the conventional side, there are herbicides that can be used. On the organic side, you could look at different row spacing, and then the use of mechanical control. This is actually a 30-inch spacing here. Some of this, of course, was hand weeded, but just showing you sort of the structure within that canopy. And my fear all along, or which has been my hypothesis, has been kind of defeated, is that when given the row spacing of 30 inches, hemp will have it's going to want to have these internodes closer together. And my fear was that the branching is going to, take this open space much more. But as long as your intra-row spacing is good, it seems to be able to stay in control of that. So this again, on a 30-inch row, it can happen. I mean, there's not a lot of planters that are out like that. We use it for breeding purposes, of course, and singulation, but anywhere from 6 to 15 inch row spacing is not unheard of. So it can be done. So again, on the organic side, there's certain farms have the camera mounted units, and it really makes for a good option for this crop, again, because once it does start to actively grow, and once that canopy closure comes in, then of course the crop itself is your weed control, and it does suppress weeds by just blocking that sunlight to those weeds. As this is an organic crop in northern Saskatchewan, actually, a variety of ours called Katani. So yeah, we're at this stage, we've got basically complete canopy cover on those row spacing. The weed control is going to be pretty decent for this field. Talking of the different herbicides, I'm not going to go through each one of these, but just to give you an indication, I also chair the minor use committee for hemp. The meetings are next week in Gatineau, Quebec, and so these are the ones that we've been able to convince companies to put on the label for minor use. So Assure, as mentioned, Edge, and Brotex are the three kind of main ones, I guess, that would be used. And these are the other things that we've been working on. As mentioned, fungicide Lance, we're still looking at, it's not registered yet, but these are sort of the projects that we've taken on. Often get a lot of questions about how hemp will tolerate frost, and I think for both of our areas that we farm in, this is a reality. So as I mentioned, in 2015, when I was still working for the government, doing research, we had a seed. That was the year that we had our seeding date trial. So we had hemp in the ground beginning of May. We'd take every 2 weeks, we'd make another pass right into the first or second week of July, actually. And lo and behold, that's the year that on May 30th, we had about a -4, -5 degree Celsius frost. This is the effect it had the next morning on hemp. This was the big picture is the early seeded hemp. So slight yellowing, purpling too, meaning that there's some stress involved there. The smaller plants may be a little bit more yellow, but really it came through like a champ. Actually, there was very little mortality. I thought I had a picture, but I had pictures before of the soybeans that were up at that point in time. They were completely toast. Flax was toast. So my suggestion is that hemp is fairly tolerant to a spring frost and a fall frost. So getting into harvest and fall time now, this is a picture of a seed head that likely had a fall frost. Those we call these the sugar leaves, or that comes from the marijuana part, is the sugar leaves. The fan leaves are the ones that are kind of more so on the stalk. But you can see what I was talking about earlier about how the bract material opens up. Particularly this one seed down in the bottom right-hand corner here, and a number of them. Again, moving from the stem outward is how that seed is going to mature. You can see there's actually some bird damage up in the right here already where they've picked those seeds off. So it's something to be aware of. So timing of harvest is again, a lot of the crop is going to look quite green, but if you take a close look, and if the head looks like this, where the majority, over 75% of the seed is kind of sitting out already, it's probably in or less than that 20% moisture. And at any point between 10 to 20%, you can begin harvest. That seed is mature, and if you get closer to the 20%, you will have a tougher time because, again, that bract material is still going to be quite green and moist, and gets into the grain tank, and just the cleaning system of the combine just has a tough time getting the separation there. So important to I'm more comfortable now doing this large scale in that 10 to 12% as but for early growers, or if there's a risk of wind coming, it is possible to seed at that moisture, but you do have to be aware that you have a very moist crop that can heat on you in very little time. So the objective there is to dry below 10%. 9% is kind of the industry standard, what most of the processors want the grain to come in at. And so that's where you want to keep it for safe storage. This is a field. This is that field of Catani that I was talking about that was on faba stubble in my place. So this was at 13% moisture, and I mean it really looks like it's you're doing some silage here, but a lot of that seed was mature. I mean, this was a seed field. The germ came back at 92% germ, and I was very happy with how the yield turned out on this field. Just another picture of what happens more so in southern Alberta. So it can be swath, same rule of principle, I guess, and maybe I didn't touch on it yet, but one of the reasons that we want to be harvesting on the more moist side is that the reason is that the pectin and lignin that are holding the fibers within the stalk are still viable, alive, and holding those fibers. So as the stalks go through the combine, whether it's a rotary, it makes a loop and a half is kind of what we would like to see, or if it goes through a conventional concave and cylinder, gets hit once, the seed drops off, and the stalk doesn't just explode in the combine, which it will do if it's excessively dry. Explode is kind of a dramatic term, but if you can imagine a very dry stalk, it hits those cylinders and just the fibers just kind of start to wrap on everything. And this is just an indication of on the outside of the machine. So this is a 9870 combine, that drive shaft in the front there that has some corrugation anywhere hemp was able to catch on, and then it just builds up. And so it's not a bad idea, at least every hopper, just take a walk around the combine, see if you have any of this buildup. The way I was able to get rid of that issue was just some duct tape and some PVC pipe, 4-inch PVC pipe around the shaft. This, it wasn't spinning around, so there was nothing for him to hang on to. So that alleviated that problem. And 20 minutes of cutting that fiber off every hopper was a good time saver. The back of the combine on a John Deere. This is the beater that pushes as the straw comes off the rotor. This beater pushes it down either throughout past the straw chopper, or what we're doing is just dropping the straw. But in that shaft area, you're getting some wrapping again. So what I did, or what from others that have known that problem, is some baler belting. Try to keep it all the same size, and every second paddle or whatever, that as long as it can rub on the side of the wall of the inside the combine, then that kind of alleviated that problem. So there's little tips and tricks like this for every color of combine. And so, yeah, either talking to others that have grown hemp or agronomists that have been around for a while can assist you with those slight modifications. Always good to have some sort of fire suppressant. I mean, with every crop, but hemp in particular, it can cause issues, and I mean, there's a good chance you will smell smoke once in a while. So just make sure that you're prepared for that. A good moisture meter. Make sure this is really the traditional one that's on the prairies, the old Labtronic 919. The thing to note on here is you can get the charts from the Canadian Grain Commission. You can see here where the normal calibration here is at 53. For hemp, it's at 73. So just make sure that you calibrate properly. If you're moving from another crop, canola or wheat, you're used to calibrating at 53. Hemp is 73, doesn't have that red little dial. And so that can change about 1.5 points in your sample, usually to the bad side. So if you think you're at 9, it's probably 10.5. So just another little tip and trick to make sure that you kind of read the directions, as they say. Storage and handling, it's kind of it's a raw product that the grain processors are processing. So really, it comes from a farmer's bin. They suggest which seed cleaner you take it to. The seed cleaner cleans it. It moves from there by truck to the processors, and it's immediately either crushed for oil, and it's a cold press, so there's no chemicals, no heat that's used there to start to, if there's any sort of microbial activity or anything else. So the first thing that is going to happen that you're going to be, kind of have sticker shock to, is that it will be cleaned to a higher standard because of that. So it's cleaned to 99.95 or 99.9% purity, that grain. So your dockage is fairly high, anywhere from 10 to 15%, and higher perhaps if it's on organic production. But yeah, doing a little bit extra job cleaning your harvest equipment, combine. It is a gluten-free product that the processors are selling, so you want to make sure that you can provide, you don't want any wheat contamination in there, because that will cause problems. Cleaning out your bins properly, don't leave anything else, and try to eliminate the opportunity for rodents and pests as much as possible. So the last note was to invest in moisture cables, because again, we are working with that crop, bringing in a high moisture and then trying to get it down into a storable percentage. Both time, temperature, and moisture are the three things that have an effect of these limits. And so this is just kind of a standard what Canada has put as far as the maximum limits for any one of these. So peroxide value, as I mentioned, peroxide value measures what rancidity might be in that seed. So very important to handle it as gently as possible too. On the harvest side, I mentioned on the seeding side, but on the harvest side, if you're using augers, try to use the largest diameter and keep the augers full as possible to limit cracking. Conveyors are recommended, not necessarily you have to have them, but just keeping that in mind. And that's what happens. So if it's handled too rough, that peroxide value is going to be higher than that, which means there's a rancid taste. And if you open up the seed coat, you're going to have some brown seed, yellow seed that doesn't look very good for dehulling. And of course, it actually tastes bad too. So the other things, coliforms, fecal coliforms, I mean, E. coli. So again, rodents or birds or anything. If a processor asks you, well, they will ask you to take a sample and retain a sample. Don't just leave the pail open in the shop where a mouse might run over it overnight or anything, because that is, they're testing for this, and that sample is what is indicating what's in your bin. They're not going to necessarily tell you that it fails. They'll give you ample opportunity to, maybe take a load out, take another sample before anything drastic goes on as far as not taking it for food production. But there's fairly stringent limits here, definitely not unattainable, but definitely you have to be make sure that you're aware of it and do what you can at that grassroots level to keep things safe. For consumers, that's the main goal. So we're obviously blessed with growing as much canola as we do. This is the bins we use primarily, both for canola and hemp, but a good hopper bottom bin with an aeration fan is your first step. And again, if we're harvesting anything over 16%, we'll turn that bin completely within 24 hours. The problem is, a lot is that green brack material that will go out to the outside of the walls. Air is going to take the path of least resistance, and it's going to kind of go around those areas. So that leaves a hot spot. So it's important to completely empty that bin, put it in the next bin until you get it down into that 12, 13%. Then you kind of have an opportunity for a couple, 3 days there as the drying goes on. These little lids on top, you can't get enough moisture going out of there. It's pumping a bunch of moisture out. You will get condensation on the ceiling and dripping down. So those are the things that you just kind of have to be care of. So it definitely takes a little extra management on handling the grain at the end of the day. Grain dryers, you can certainly use. The cautionary note here is to go low and slow. Very sensitive again to any overheating. So the rule of thumb really is the plenum is set for around 120, 130, maybe 140 degrees Fahrenheit max. Grain shouldn't get any warmer than 100 degrees Fahrenheit. If it needs to go through twice, do that. Don't try to do it all in one go if you're starting to toast. There is a market for toasted hemp seed, but to let the processors control that and do that, and try not to do it on the farm. So that's just once again, dry, low, and slow. Take your time and be careful. So a little bit on machinery, and then we're kind of going to get into the fiber part of things here too. So this is a European model company called Hemp Flax, I think they're called, over in Germany or the Netherlands. So they've been harvesting for some time. I mean, had the opportunity to use hemp for animal feed, where it's still under review in Canada. It's still illegal to feed it to animals that are going for processing and distribution. If you fed it to your own animal and ate that animal, that's fine. Or but anyway, we're able to eat it without any trouble, but we can't feed it to animals yet. But here's what we would call a triple kind of cut system, where we've got the opportunity to windrow the stalks. He's got the header up high, cutting just the seed heads and the flour. Everything from the chaffer on or sieve goes into the wagon, is fed. This was the way in Canada we were doing a little bit of CBD production, I guess, collecting that chaff material, which had some CBD in it. But that's one machine. This is another multi-cut machine. This one comes out of, this is a Dunagro, quite pricey, these ones. We can talk about price after, but this is a stripper header. Often get asked questions about stripper headers, and the crop is quite short here. But for the most part, this machine has been doing crop that's very tall. It was based out of Manitoba, I believe. So really not a lot of issues with that stripper header. But again, I think there's some modifications, like just a straight Shelburne Reynolds stripper header may cause problems. So I wouldn't be quick to purchase one without looking further into that. And then on the fiber research side, right from 1998, we started doing the research on fiber, and hopefully we have some interesting things that we can provide to the processors with regards to fiber quality, etc. But much has to be learned, I think, still on the retting process, and again the question about fertility and other agronomy aspects. So using disc bind, sickle mowers, or swathers can work depending on how tall the crop may be. Again, this is indicated by the processors of what they would prefer, I would say, and the variety that you're growing and the height that it grows. This is a picture of one unit that has a multi-cut stature. It's a sickle bar on 4 levels. Really, the fiber length doesn't have to be 14 feet tall. And as a matter of fact, that just causes more problems. If you can imagine having to bale a windrow with 14-foot stalks, when does it stop? It just keeps going in there, and you have a heck of a time. So this is a model, and I believe Canada Rockies have a couple of these in the area, and other processors may have that opportunity too. But it's a little bit more specialized equipment as we move into a more specialized crop. And the retting process, again, I feel there's still much to be learned on this. This is really indicative of and important what the quality of that crop will be, because the retting process is essentially considered to be controlled rotting. So you have the crop laying in the field for a certain time. You might turn it once or twice to get those microbes starting on the backside or on both sides. That's what's eating that pectin and lignin. It's microbes from the soil that start to digest those. So it makes the what's called the decortication, or the separation of that bast and herd fiber easier, and keeps everything intact. So this is just a tedder rake putting that type of material into a windrow so you could actually bale it. And I think the tedder rakes on a horizontal work better than the vertical sort of wheel rakes. They'll tend to plug up a bit. So very capable. It can be baled. One of the biggest issues is that the bales, of course, like every other bale, very bulky and a lot of air. So a lot of times what seems to be a hindrance is location of your field to the processing plant. And as fuel prices and trucking prices go up, then that concentric circle just seems to shrink more and more. So, but this is kind of, whether it's a round bale, some companies like a square bale. Again, whatever and whoever you are contracting with, make sure you know what they're after.